Hello and welcome to this webinar, the fourth in our series on our new book, System1, Unlocking Profitable Growth. I'm Orlando Wood and I'm joined by co-author Tom Ewing.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking to you about Chapter 4, which is all about brand building. So our System1 book, System1, Unlocking Profitable Growth, which is going to be available in its hard copy form this month, is a book that's all about how you design marketing for the System1 brain, for the System1 decision making. Our book is in 5 chapters, and the first chapter sets out what decision making, how we decide, so the different types of decision making, System 1 and System 2, and the importance of System 1, this fast and frugal dominant way of making decisions. And then applies the thinking to 4 different areas of marketing: innovation, advertising, brand building, and shopper marketing. And today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, which is all about brand building and applying the features and I suppose designing your marketing for the features of System 1. Before I go any further, just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping points. One is that this webinar will be about 20 minutes today, and there will be opportunity to ask questions after that 20 minutes. So if you see, you'll probably see on your screens, there is a box for you to type in questions. If you have any questions as we go, please do type them in, and Tom and I will try to answer them at the end of the session. The other point is just to say that a recording of this session will be made available to you tomorrow, and that if you wanted to request a copy of the deck that we're showing today, then please just get in touch and we'll send that to you too. So without further ado, brand building, Tom, and we're going to start with this picture, an impressionist painting, Edouard Manet's A Bar at the Folies Bergère, painted in 1882. Why are we starting with this picture, Tom?
Well, the answer actually lies a few years back from 1882. I want to take you back now. I'm going to read out a little bit from the book. In London in 1875. On New Year's Eve 1875, most of London was in celebratory mood, raising glasses of beer to cheer in the new year. But one man was not partying. He was standing outside a certain London office, patiently waiting for midnight. Beer was on his mind too, but he wasn't thinking about drinking it. The office was where trademarks would be issued, and the 1st of January 1876 was the day the UK Trademark Registration Act would come into effect. The man worked for the Bass Brewery, and his task was to ensure their red triangle would become the first ever UK trademark. He succeeded. Bass still uses the red triangle today, and in 2013 they even renamed their beer Trademark No. 1 in its honour. But what does a red triangle have to do with beer? Absolutely nothing. The association is arbitrary. It's a classic example of distinctiveness beating differentiation. Everyone in Victorian England and beyond would have recognised Bass from the triangle alone, and the trademark is even immortalised in this famous Manet painting of a barmaid. If you look at the bottom right and bottom left, you'll see that familiar red logo. Now, the Bass triangle is what we call a distinctive asset, something that brands can develop which is instantly mentally associated with them by System 1. And we'll be talking a bit more about distinctive assets and about creating the fluency needed to easily process a brand later on. But the thing that's the reason that we're using this as a starting point also is that since 1875 and the kind of earlier days of branding, the introduction of trademarks, the introduction of logos like the red triangle, brands have taken over the world. Brands are now absolutely ubiquitous. You have thousands of branded impressions every day. But the basic principles behind branding haven't changed terribly much. And that's because the basic ways in which human beings make decisions haven't changed. They still use System 1 to make fast and frugal decisions. Back in Chapter 1 and in the first webinar in this series, we talked about 3 shortcuts that the brain uses to make these System 1 decisions. It learns from experience. If it's familiar with something and if something worked the last time, then it's probably a good choice and will work again. It learns from emotion. If a choice feels good, then it's probably a good choice. and it learns from pattern recognition. We are pattern recognizing machines that constantly scan our environment for regularities, and when we see and recognize something regular, then that feels like a good choice to us. And we call these three heuristics that guide System 1 fame, feeling, and fluency, and they are at the heart of our philosophy and our model of branding. So we're going to talk about each of those in turn, starting with fame.
So fame is the first of the three that we talk about. And to our System 1 minds, if a brand comes readily to mind, then it is a good choice. There's something in psychology called the availability heuristic. If something comes quickly and easily to mind, then it is, it's therefore plausible and a good decision. And so marketing to System 1 really requires creative focus on achieving fame, also achieving feeling and fluency. Let's have a look at something that we share in the book. This is how brands perform on these mental shortcuts. And the idea is that a brand needs to create amongst as many people as possible the mental shortcuts of fame, feeling, and fluency. So the brand needs to come quickly and easily to mind, and that's what fame is all about. In this slide, you can see how small brands and big brands differ in the size of the fame, feeling, and fluency shortcuts that have been established across the population. So small brands have very little amount of fame, and big brands have huge amounts of fame. And in fact, it's fame that explains best the relationship between small brands and big brands. So in order to create a big brand, you need to become a household name. You need to become top of mind. You need to become famous. Let's just look at an example of this. There is a bank brand, a Spanish bank called Santander, which launched in the UK market in 2010. And it has achieved through consistent marketing, through a very strong campaign, very high levels of fame. It's also achieved high levels of feeling and fluency, which has enabled it to grow. But if you compare its fame relative to a very established bank brand in the UK, so that's Barclays, which was established in 1892 or thereabouts, then you can see that it's almost caught up entirely in the space of just a few years. Now, one of the questions that our clients tend to ask us is, well, are there any shortcuts for fame? Obviously, we need to, you need to spend, and you need to spend on your communications to, and ensure that you look for reach in your communications to imprint this kind of level of fame. But there's perhaps another way to do it too that we talk about a little bit in the book. And Santander is quite a good example of this. And Santander's long-running campaign focused on their proposition, the 1, 2, 3 current account. So let me just read a little bit from the book about their 1, 2, 3 account and how this helped them to create fame. Santander's signature product, the 1, 2, 3 account, launched in 2012. It had a distinctive name, easy to recognize and remember. Its genius lay in the fact that it didn't just tap branding fluency, it also drew on fluent innovation. In a marketplace full of extremely complex financial products, the 1, 2, 3 account was just very easy to understand. The 1 and 2 referred to the percentage levels of cashback Santander offered, a term already familiar to the British public, but used here to mean a proportion of the money a customer spent on household bills that would be credited by the bank to the customer. The 3 was a 3% interest rate offered on balances. To take full advantage of the account, you needed to have a sizable sum in your account and a Santander mortgage, but all that was System 2 detail. From a System 1 perspective, the 1, 2, 3 account was a rare ray of clarity in a mire of difficult choices. Consumers went for it in their droves, and it quickly became one of the UK's most popular financial products. Santander and the 1, 2, 3 account show what's possible when innovation and brand building work hand in hand, a distinctive asset that builds feeling and fame. So just a very nice example of how a fluent innovation, something we talk about in chapter 2 of the book, an innovation that is presented to the public in such a way that it feels sort of 80% familiar and 20% novel. That this fluent innovation is something that might be able to I think, catalyze your fame building activities and get people talking about your brand and increase the fame that you can achieve.
So moving on to the second of the 3 F's, feeling. In some ways, the affect heuristic, which is what feeling is rooted in, is the kind of easiest to grasp, the most obvious almost of the 3 F's. If I feel good about a brand, it's a good choice. As Daniel Kahneman points out in Thinking Fast and Slow, feeling good about something, one's emotional response to something, is very, very often a proxy for the kind of complex thought processes that might go in. If I feel good about something, it's a good choice. But feeling has another dimension to it. And we discovered this when we started analyzing our branding database. Feeling turns out to be particularly important to predicting a brand's growth or signaling the danger of decline. When we divide up our database into growing, stable and declining brands, those rising in market share or those falling in market share, and those in the middle, we find that one of the key factors here is feeling. Growing brands tend to have a higher degree of feeling relative to their size, relative to their current market share. And declining brands have the reverse, a lower share of feeling, a lower level of feeling relative to their market share. And we call this feeling surplus on the one hand, positive, and feeling deficit on the other hand, which is negative. You want to avoid that. And that is the core of our predictions for kind of increase in market share. And these have been validated in a number of studies. There's a UK supermarket study that we talk about in the book where we really track how feeling towards a brand became a leading indicator of its rise and fall within the market. We can offer here an example that calls back to chapter 3 of the book. If you were attending the previous webinar, you may remember Monty the Penguin, the touching tale of a boy and his penguin pal. That was one of the Christmas advertisements of John Lewis. And this award-winning campaign for John Lewis has stretched over several years, featuring not just Monty, but a plethora of animated and playful animals in what John Lewis, the department store brand, calls tales of thoughtful gifting. Now, something that the adverts tend to have in common is they all score very, very highly on feeling. They are 4-star and 5-star emotional ads for the most part. And over the years, this has transferred to the brand, and John Lewis regularly, when we look at brands of British origin, does extremely well among retailers. And we've seen with our own predictions here, looking at the feeling levels, the emotional levels gained by the ads, that it maps actually very closely onto the actual share growth that John Lewis has enjoyed since the campaign has begun, rising from a 22% market share at the start of the thoughtful gifting campaign, and it now enjoys a 29% after such ads as Monty have been very successful. So feeling is crucial for a brand. Feeling is that positive feeling, that surplus feeling for a brand is the leading indicator of brand growth. But on to the third F now, which is in some ways the most fundamental of all, Orlando.
Thanks, Tom. So fluency, or processing fluency, as psychologists might call it, this is all about pattern recognition. So earlier, Tom, you were talking about how pattern recognition was an important feature of System 1 decision making. Well, it certainly is, because what it enables us to do is to recognize something very quickly and then act upon it. If I can recognize a brand quickly, to my System 1 mind, it is a good choice. There's something interesting about fluency, processing fluency, and that's that it's related to how much we're likely to pay for something. In a fascinating experiment conducted by psychologists, this really comes to the fore. What psychologists did was they gave people some regular $1 bills, and they gave some other people some dollar coins, and some other people a slightly doctored $1 bill, so it looks slightly different from the current one. And they asked people what they could afford to buy with these different forms of currency, ranging from, you know, the familiar, the current form of currency, through to the less familiar. And they found that people who received the current dollar bill could thought they could buy twice as many items. They looked at everyday items like staples, twice as many items as those who received a slightly unfamiliar form of currency, the coin or the unfamiliar dollar bill. And this is repeated in various experiments in psychology, and shows that the processing fluency, how easy it is to recognize something, how familiar it is, you know, that the patterns adhere and conform to what's expected. That this processing fluency gives people, confers value on the item in question, because if we're familiar with something, we like it more, and, you know, we'll end up paying more for it. So in our database, you can see here in this illustration that brands that are in the bottom third on price within their category tend not to be very distinctive, and that brands in the top third on price in their category tend to be perceived as very distinctive, very fluent, that had to have much greater processing fluency. So if you want to reduce price sensitivity towards your brand, then aim to create processing fluency through the use of distinctive assets. One client we've been working with recently that owns the stock cube brand OXO in the UK has been working to create or recreate a fluent advertising device, and this is the OXO family. So for many years, the OXO family in the UK was a long-running advertising campaign for the OXO brand, and we saw the characters grow up during, you know, over the course of 15-20 years or so. And we did some research for Premier Foods, who own the OXO brand, and this revealed that 17 years after the OXO family campaign had finished, the OXO family was still the most distinctive thing, the primary association for the brand amongst the population. So working with JWT and their agency, and also with the client, of course, this learning and our work with them has led them to recreate the OXO family for the modern world, the modern audience. And you can see a still of this in the visual in front of you. So this is a way, a device to create fluency, to create processing fluency, and just make sure that the brand is constantly refreshed in people's neural networks. They remember it, and that it's top of mind. It's the household name that you need it to be.
But it isn't just creative, fluent devices that can be distinctive assets. Almost anything can be a distinctive asset for a brand. All it has to do is have a unique mental association, a powerful mental association with the brand. For instance, colors alongside sounds, logos, slogans, all of these can act as distinctive assets. What we're looking at here is taken from System1 Research's distinctive assets test, and it's from the same self-funded study of UK banks. Now, if you recall, Barclays, a very long established bank, and Santander, a much newer challenger brand, were the two brands we looked at earlier. And here we can see them at the top of this table. What you see is that Barclays, this very long established brand, owns all the various shades of blue that we tested. Blue is actually a very common color in the UK banking market, probably because it's quite a sober, stable color, and Barclays does extremely well, both on its shade of blue, but also has strong associations with all the other shades of blue. Santander, on the other hand, you can see absolutely dominates in terms of red. We asked people under time pressure, which brand do you associate this color with? And in the case of Santander, the two shades of red that we tested, both of them were terribly strongly associated with this challenger brand. What's very interesting is that one of those shades of red is actually the one that's used in the HSBC logo. And as you can see there down at the bottom, HSBC, despite being a far more established brand, does not score terribly well on either shade of red. And what that shows is the extent to which Santander has successfully deployed red as a distinctive asset, has owned it within the banking space, and now is a primary association with that colour. And not only with that colour, with one of its chief rivals colours. So that's the power of distinctive assets.
So does this, how do we use these three shortcuts, fame, feeling and fluency, in our brand tracking model? Well, what we do is we bring those three shortcuts together to create a star rating for your brand from 1 star through to 5 star. And this has been shown across many markets and categories globally to explain market share, or in market performance, as we've called it here on this chart. And once you've got a model that explains market share, you've got a model that helps you to create it. And so the 3 Fs and a model that is centered around the 3 Fs is something that we believe will help our clients to grow their brands.
So to sum up, what you need to do if you're a brand is to create a fame, feeling and fluency advantage. And you can do each of these in different ways. Develop a fame advantage is all about aspiring to become a household name. It's getting yourself to come readily to mind when people consider that category. If you already are a household name, then you can use your existing assets, rather like OXO did with the OXO family. And the beer brand Budweiser has just brought back its frogs, at least in the UK, within its advert, who are a strong distinctive asset. You can use these distinctive assets that have built up long mental recognition over time to remind people that you are. In terms of actually gaining fame, spend is the slow road, but the effective road to gaining it. But you can also gain fame via innovation. Innovation expands your map, as it were. It makes you more a fluent innovation that's both a little surprising and a lot familiar, gives people something that they can talk about, introduces you to new customers, and generally can increase fame quite rapidly, as in the case of Santander and its 1, 2, 3 product. It's also very important to increase the number of people who know about you via feeling. And the best way to grow feeling, which is the leading indicator of your market share growth, is through widely targeted emotional marketing. So advertising, particularly video advertising online and off, tends to be extremely good at generating emotion. But this has to be, again, widely reaching as wide a population as you can, because most of your growth is, as Andrew Ehrenberg discovered way back in marketing science history, most of your growth is going to come from people who do not already buy you. It's going to come from increasing penetration. And finally, develop a fluency advantage. You need to determine and then consistently deploy your distinctive assets. So you need, first of all, to work out what assets are associated with you, what the automatic and strong mental associations with your brand are. It might be fluent devices that you use in advertising, like characters. It might be slogans, it might be colors, as in the case of Santander. It might even be sounds and smells. And then you need to make sure that every brand touch point somehow refers back to one of these distinctive assets. So that's how we think brands can use the 3 Fs, fame, feeling and fluency, to achieve profitable growth.
Thanks, Tom. So that's essentially the webinar today. Up next is Chapter 5, Shopper Marketing, in a couple of weeks' time. But I just wondered if we had any questions coming through the wires. Let's have a little look. Here's one, Tom. How do you establish a brand's distinctive assets?
That's an excellent question. The way that you establish a brand's distinctive assets, what you need to know is which assets come immediately to mind, or which assets are kind of instantly and automatically associated with a brand by System1. And the way that you do that is that you test a variety of assets under time pressure. If you don't give people very long to think about it, that's an excellent proxy for that kind of automatic association. We can't read people's minds, but by looking at their reaction times and by looking at how quickly they associate colors, shapes, sounds, logos, what have you, with the brands and which brands they associate with, we can get an idea of the strength of distinctive assets. And the results can actually sometimes be very surprising. Quite often, assets that a brand thinks might be strong turn out to be quite weak. Assets that a brand hasn't really touched for many years, like the Oxo family, actually turn out to have extremely strong associations.
This is quite extremely important for creative development and working out your strategic goals. What is it that we need to be communicating, and how do we imprint those? How do we create those mental shortcuts in the population's mind?
Exactly.
So, well, thank you very much for listening, everyone. I think that's all we've got time for. And thank you, Tom, for your session today.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed it. And do tune in next time for Shopper Marketing, the last in this webinar series. Look forward to speaking to you then. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.